No doubt you've discovered that loyalty is no longer the currency of the realm, as your father believes.
Then what is?
I'm afraid currency is the currency of the realm.
Across the Spanish Main. Part 2. Foothold of Fortune. By 1510, the Spanish had carved out a precarious foothold on the wild mainland coast of South America, just east of the narrow, fever-ridden strip that would become Panama. But, from the very beginning, the Spanish colony met fierce resistance. Disease and hunger swept through the settlers like wildfire, and they found themselves hemmed in on all sides by wary native tribes who viewed these newcomers with hostility. At last, the few remaining colonists were forced to abandon their dreams of conquest, fleeing to the safety of a second settlement on the isthmus itself. This new colony, a collection of huts around a natural harbor, would be called Nombre de Dios. Exhausted from their ordeal, the settlers reportedly gasped, "Let us stop here, in the name of God." This humble village would later become famous throughout Europe as a gateway to the New World's riches. But in 1510, it was little more than a crude outpost in a vast wilderness, the final hope of survival for the colonists who had been pushed to the brink. Amid these early struggles, a man of ambition and charisma, Vasco Núñez de Balboa, rose to lead the settlement. Balboa, a Spaniard of noble lineage but modest means, had arrived in the Americas seeking fortune and renown. When he heard tales of a great southern sea hidden just beyond the mountains, he was gripped by a desire to find it. In 1513, Balboa set out with a small party of Spaniards and native guides, following winding trails through dense, uncharted jungles, ascending steep mountain paths and battling through humid forests alive with the calls of birds and dangers of the unknown. After days of arduous travel, they reached the ridge of the Continental Divide. From this vantage, Balboa became the first European to lay eyes on what would be named the Pacific Ocean. As he gazed upon its blue expanse, he knelt and took possession of the waters in the name of the Spanish crown, unaware of the fierce rivalries and bloodshed this new sea would soon draw to its shores. Balboa's discovery promised untold riches and renewed the Spaniard's dream of an empire. Even as he marveled at the distant waters, stories reached his ears of powerful kingdoms and golden treasures hidden further south. But fate, as it turned out, had other plans for Balboa. Before word of his discovery could even reach Spain, King Ferdinand had grown impatient, declaring Panama the Castillo de Oro, or Golden Castle, and sending a new governor to wrest control of the colony from Balboa's hands. The man chosen to replace Balboa was Pedro Arias de Avila, shortened sometimes to Pedro Arias Davila, and shortened further to Pedrarius Avila. He was an aging knight, infamous for both his ruthlessness and his cunning. At 70 years of age, he was an unlikely candidate for such a physically demanding mission. Yet Pedrarius was a man of extraordinary endurance. Years before, he had fallen gravely ill and was even placed in a coffin, thought dead by all. Only a faithful servant noticed him stir as the funeral was about to commence. Afterward, Pedrarius ordered an annual requiem mass held for himself in his hometown, attending each year from the depths of his own open grave. Arriving in Panama with a legion of Spanish adventurers, Pedrarius quickly made it clear that he was no friend of Balboa's. Jealous and bitter, he spread rumors of Balboa's failures, depriving him of resources and denying him the men needed to explore any further. The rivalry reached its climax when Pedrarius, accusing Balboa of treason and sedition, ordered him arrested. In a swift and merciless trial, Balboa was sentenced to death, his accomplishments dismissed, his dreams extinguished on the executioner's block. Pedrarius had brought with him a force of some 1,500 settlers, a rough mix of hardened soldiers and thrill-seeking adventurers. These men, who styled themselves as Hidalgos, or sons of something, proudly displayed their noble airs. Dressed in silks, brocades, and embroidered jackets, they fancied themselves as aristocrats, even if their pockets were empty and their possessions no more than rusted swords and worn saddles. Accustomed to fighting wars, they had little knowledge of the practical skills needed to survive, let alone cultivate the land. Hungry and far from the comforts of Spain, they turned to raid, falling upon native villages with a ruthless drive for gold and supplies. Their lust for wealth was met with fierce resistance from the native peoples. Initially, the indigenous communities of Panama welcomed these bedraggled newcomers, offering meat, fruit, and fish to the Spaniards in an effort to make peace. But the Hidalgos, certain of their divine mission, demanded immediate conversion to Christianity, an ultimatum delivered in a language the natives couldn't even understand. When conversion was not forthcoming, the Spaniards took this as refusal, declaring the right to enslave the locals. By night, they raided villages, turning vicious war dogs on the terrified villagers, setting huts ablaze and carrying off captives in chains. Word of these atrocities spread, marking the beginning of a dark and painful chapter in the Spanish conquest of the New World. The Hidalgos soon faced retribution from an unlikely foe, the land itself. Panama's dense jungles and swampy lowlands held dangers unknown to European constitutions. They quickly succumbed to strange fevers, swollen joints, and bouts of debilitating exhaustion. The very air was thick with illness, made worse by the heavy, damp mists rising from the jungle floor. Among the worst afflictions was a sickness known as modora, the drowsiness, a mysterious disease that left men languishing in a state of feverish stupor before drawing them to their deaths. By the time the colony's forces had fully assembled, nearly 2/3 of the original settlers had perished. Silk jackets hung limp and muddled on the gaunt shoulders of survivors, their noble dreams of plantation wealth and slave labor withering amid the brutal reality of tropical swamps. Beyond Panama, Spanish settlements did spread quickly through the Caribbean, with Hispaniola as the administrative heart of the New World colonies. But as Spanish influence expanded to Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Jamaica, the Spaniards encountered new native peoples. The Arawak, a gentle and hospitable population, initially regarded the Spanish with awe, offering their labor in the fields and mines. But when the Spanish demanded that they mine for gold, raise crops, and serve as laborers under the grueling conditions of servitude, the Arawak began to perish in alarming numbers. Disease, unknown in their lands before the arrival of the Europeans, swept through their villages, while others took their own lives rather than face enslavement. As the Arawak population dwindled, the Spanish turned to the importation of African slaves to work the plantations and mines, inadvertently beginning a new, darker chapter of exploitation in the Americas. Spanish settlers, frustrated by the island's poor returns and diminishing labor force, increasingly set their eyes on promise of riches of the mainland. This recurring news of greater wealth beckoned from Mexico and further south in the lands of the Aztec and Inca empires. The Caribbean was no longer the ultimate prize, but a springboard for ambitious men eager to conquer and claim the vast riches rumored to lie across the mainland. Expeditions set sail westward in search of new territories, bringing with them the full might of Spain's imperial ambition. These explorers and soldiers, many of them little more than ragged hidalgos, soon found a fortune in Mexico, a land rich with jewels, gold, and elaborate cities beyond anything they had ever seen. Men like Hernán Cortés carved a bloody path through the Aztec Empire, subjugating a civilization and laying the foundation for Spanish rule across the Americas. Cortés's lieutenant, Pedro de Alvarado, pressed further south, subduing indigenous cultures in Guatemala and El Salvador, while Francisco Pizarro set his sights on the Inca, his thirst for conquest propelling him to the peaks of the Andes and into the heart of the Golden Empire. In the following years, the wealth of the New World, gold from Peru, silver from Mexico, emeralds from Colombia, would flow steadily into Spanish hands. The port of Cartagena rose as a bustling trade hub where treasure-laden ships set sail for Spain, while the city of Panama became a gateway for the overland transport of riches from the Pacific coast to the Caribbean. Yet for all the wealth they extracted, the Spanish settlers were never truly secure, for waiting in the shadows were men who saw Spain's monopoly on New World riches as a challenge, men who would stop at nothing to claim their own share. The age of conquest had begun, but so had the age of the Spanish Main, a stage set for wealth, treachery, and conflict that would draw adventurers, privateers, and pirates from across the world.